Good morning, everyone. I'm Charlie Gough, and I'm here with today's Festive Tech Calendars edition around cloud security. Um, I'm a IT consultant for Open Systems, working in the security space, and avid blogger and fantastic to be part of the cloud family on Twitter and everything. So happy Christmas, everyone, and we'll begin. So my session today is on Kevin Mccallister's cloud security plan. So that great holiday classic, Home Alone, and what we can learn from our young star, Kevin McCallister from Home Alone. So, first off is a battle plan. Now, we might not have the battle plan that Kevin has with tar, paint, fire to protect our precious cloud environment, although that would be fun. But there's several things that the holiday classic Home Alone can teach us around that. So I'm going to see how Home Alone relates to cloud security and look at both Home Alone 1 and Home Alone 2. And let's face it, we don't really need to cover the other movies because they're not fantastic at all. So, yeah, let's see what parallels we can pull from Home Alone and to cloud security. So the first real thing that stands out from Home Alone 1 is the research and profiling. How we see Harry dressed as a police officer, and he is fishing for information. He's trying to find out what security measures they've got in their house, when they're leaving, where they're going. And that by doing that, Harry really knew who was who and what they were doing effectively, and staked out the joint, as it would be. So actually, from that perspective, that's what your malicious actors do. Look at what you've got to look around and see what you're putting onto your social media, etc., to kind of highlight how your environment's secured and what technologies you're using. And it becomes very, very key from that perspective, because people are out there, malicious actors are out there profiling your environments. The next is monitoring and detection, and this is where Kevin does really well. So to start with, Kevin looks at, he's alerted of the probable threat from Harry and Marv. He's detected their intentions by overhearing their conversation, and then effectively he's laid out the necessary precautions to mitigate against those. And that's just Home Alone 1. So in Home Alone 1, we notice Kevin notices the gold tooth, and that sticks with him and knows that something's not right from that perspective. So that was kind of the monitoring, and then the detection piece becomes when he overhears what Harry and Marv are planning to do. Again, same happens in Home Alone 2. Obviously, they're formulaic movies, so what do you expect? But effectively, Kevin works out and quickly understands what Harry and Marv's intentions are, and again sets up a plan to try and mitigate against those. Then finally is zero trust. So we see a great example in Home Alone 1, and I'll talk about this again, where Kevin really utilises zero trust principles. So with the pizza guy, when he orders a pizza, rather than going and opening the front door to the pizza guy, he sends him around the back. So he knows, he limits suddenly what he is showing. On top of that, he knows where the pizza guy's, so effectively he knows where the pizza guy's coming from. And then he turns around and says, well, leave the pizza on the doorstep. So he doesn't even open the door. He passes the money for the pizza guy through the cat flap, and because he's verified who the pizza guy is, but he's given him least privilege. And these are all these show true elements of zero trust principles. So again, what can we learn? What can we really learn from Home Alone and its capabilities and everything, and as a movie and within a cloud security approach? So there's three real takeaways that I've found. The first is you've got to be alert. So if activity looks suspicious, it probably is suspicious. So you're not just looking for external threats. They're the easiest ones to try and spot. We all know what a phishing package looks like. We all know what ransomware looks like. They're easy. Some of the biggest threat to anything is your internal threat. So you've got to be aware of who you let in, what you give access to. We'll touch on that with zero trust again, but you've really got to be cautious with what you actually provide and are able to do. And that it doesn't just stem from an IT security. This stems to your end users. You've got to make sure your end users are being alert. You've got to make them aware of things. And we've all seen cybersecurity training and how boring some of the cybersecurity training out there is, and most employees get disengaged with it. So think of ways you can make it fun. Think of ways you can test your employees. We had one recently within my company where they sent a phishing email out to all employees saying, "Congratulations, you've got a gift because it's holiday season. Here's a gift." But likewise, we also had a breach which was very similar, where actually we had text messages coming through, and that appeared to be from our CEO, asking us to go and purchase large volumes of gift cards for him. Which again, it just goes to show there's a variety of attacks. So actually making sure your end users understand what those attacks are, making sure they are vigilant around it, being alert around it, talking to them about it on a regular basis, it becomes very, very key to building out that view and approach and understanding for your organization. The next big point really is centralizing monitoring. So if you've got a SOC, if you've got just a small team or a big team, or even if you outsource, the last thing you want is these people going off and looking at various tool sets, looking at multiple tool sets, looking right across a broad stack, because it becomes a pain. And the same goes with the alerting through these tools. If you're getting alerts that are false positives, etc., it becomes a pain, and things will get missed, and you end up with more false positives and alert fatigue, etc. So it's really about being cautious around your whole monitoring piece and trying to get it into a single point so you can analyze it and actually act where possible, manually act on the alerts and the most critical alerts, and try and automate some of the least critical alerts, because it's really important to understand that if we've got far too many alerts, we're going to ignore some. If they're all critical, we're going to ignore some. And do you really want to miss the one is the most critical to your environment? Probably not. So where possible, try and automate it, and just get that centralized piece. So you're not going across multiple tool sets. You're trying to integrate in with integrate multiple tool sets into a single tool, whether that's a SIEM or something similar. But just trying to integrate everything together and making sure it works in a seamless fashion for your security operations team. And if you don't have a big team, look at outsourcing. Look at going for an MDR service. Look for somebody who will add value to your business, because that is key in these situations. Then the other one, the final thing we can really learn from Kevin Mccallister is his approach to zero trust. So Kevin is brilliant at zero trust. Considering the film was zero trust wasn't even a thing really in the 90s. He's a master. He's a king of it. We see throughout the movie that he verifies who people are. He verifies. He makes sure that he could, again with the pizza guy, he verifies who that person is. Same with same in the hotel in Home Alone 2. He verifies the concierge and just makes sure that he knows who they are and tries to give them as least privilege as possible, or least access to his environment, his area, his home. And by adopting that approach with transactions and your external clients, your external partners, your contractors, your own staff, really, it starts to formulate a way of working. And actually, the previous approach with zero trust has always been, or the previous approach within IT is, if it doesn't work, let's give admin rights. Well, we all know that doesn't work anymore. We all know that causes more problems than anything. So we've got to make things trickier. Not everybody needs access to everything. And we'll go through the tool sets in a second. But obviously that's just the first two, verify explicitly and least privileged access. And then finally is assume breach. Well, if we're perfectly honest, we know that most likely your environment at some point will have a breach, if it's not already been breached. If you think on the words of, oh, I won't get breached, you're probably breached. And that's a view that you've really got to kind of think and take home. So you've got to look at how you can mitigate how far that person can move around your environment. So within a cloud environment, rather than publishing a public IP and RDP onto a public host, start looking at Bastion, look at VNets, and look at control around actually how you move across your environment. So if you've got an on-premise environment, how you move to the cloud, whether actually you allow remote desktop from the on-premise into the cloud, or whether you require another method. Look at how actually you can put some. You're not going to go around putting booby traps in or trying to stop having tins of paint flying downstairs, or putting tar to make it very sticky and impossible to move around. But you've got to know how to protect your valuable information, and that is really a key element around this, because without that, if you're breached, you want to limit that that attack vector. You want to limit how far somebody can go, how far effectively you can travel through that environment. We've seen that recently, really well, around this time last year with SolariGate, and how that attack was developed and worked. Then finally, so that kind of covers the zero trust principles at very high level. Now, I'm a Microsoft specialist. I work in the Microsoft space. I use a M365 E3 E5 stack day in, day out. I put that in place for multiple people, multiple organizations. So I'm going to really concentrate on the Microsoft 365 stack. Now, your biggest tool, if you're in the Microsoft stack, whether that's 365 or Azure, is Azure AD, and primarily Azure AD P2, P1, and some of the controls around that. So just we've got to remember, Azure AD is no longer just your identity provider. It's a full-blown identity and access management solution. It's got conditional access in there. It's got privileged identity management. It's got multi-factor authentication. You can do your self-service password reset. It monitors your on-premise accounts. It looks for accounts that have breached passwords and alerts. There's a raft of information that Azure AD can provide you for your environment, and that is probably one of the most key areas to start locking down. If you haven't got MFA enabled for your staff, if you're afraid that it's going to cause too many headaches, trust me, MFA, yes, it can be got. You can get around it, but fundamentally, it adds a layer of protection. It reduces that risk straight away for your organisation. The next level is conditional access. Conditional access works on obviously multiple indicators and information. So whether device compliance, whether it's domain joined, whether it's an authorized cloud app, where you're coming from on a location perspective, whether you've come, what the risk is around the user, the device, all the elements for your environment. And that's where conditional access beats MFA hands down. It works side by side, but it's that next level piece. So again, look at getting MFA if you haven't already got it installed or enabled for your staff. Yes, it's a learning curve, but actually, if it protects your environment, you've really got to look at that and go, this is key for your business. The next stage is looking at other elements within Azure AD. So privileged identity management. So what are we looking at from a privileged identity piece? So your key users, your top privileged users, your global admins, your account owners, etc. Look at what they have access to and go from there. And you don't have to deploy P2 to everyone. You could just deploy it to who needs it. Now, the alternative as well is your third parties. We've talked very much about internal, but third parties, if you've got a partner you're working with, make sure they're using Azure AD PIM, Privileged Identity Management. Make sure they're having to use conditional access and MFA, enforce that on them. And you can do that through your identity governance, even down to the point of if somebody shares a file package. My recommendation would be look heavily at Azure AD. The next real big one is Defender for Everything. So the Microsoft Defender suite is huge, and I won't go in all the names because they change on a regular basis, but obviously you've got Defender for Cloud, which looks after your cloud environment. You've got Defender for Cloud Apps now, which is your CASB, your Cloud Access Security Broker. You've got Defender for Endpoint, you've got Defender for Identity, you've got Defender for IoT, Defender for Containers. The list of everything is Microsoft Defender at the moment. Looking at that in great detail is going to be key, really, and understanding what tools you can utilize. Now, I know some of these are going to be E5 subscriptions, but ask yourself, what are you actually spending out on your security tools? Have you got Kaspersky installed? Have you got other tool sets? Are they doing what Defender does? And actually look at the value between consolidating tool sets rather than having a multitude of different tool sets. Again, it's about visibility and alerting and monitoring. If you've got multiple tool sets and they're all have various different systems that you've got to manage and go into, or if they can be controlled, provide everything, that all feeds into your Azure AD and your compliance piece. So actually really make sure that you understand what your tool sets look like and where you can potentially make cost savings or operational savings, because fundamentally that is really key to your organization and your business, and to make sure actually you're getting the best value across the board. And again, Defender for Cloud is a fantastic tool. You get your vulnerability scanning. You can look at where you've got weaknesses. It will work within your hybrid environment, so using Azure Arc. There's a whole raft of information around and to look at that in more detail. But if you're running in a hybrid environment, which most organizations are, Defender for Cloud with Azure Arc is a fantastic tool set to consider and think about, especially about enhancing your security posture on your internal network, on your hybrid environment. Finally, is Microsoft Sentinel. Now, there are other themes available, but if you, again, being invested in the Microsoft stack, Sentinel is the one that stands out more than anything for me. It's the ability to automate and against alerts and remediate on the fly makes it one of the best tools on the market currently. Now, again, with E5 licensing, you get an amount of data now per user per month that can consume some of that E5 data going into Azure Sentinel, or Microsoft Sentinel, sorry. I keep getting messed up with the constant rebranding of Microsoft tools. So it becomes cheaper to run. You can get insights through various tool sets. So you've got multiple you can get your logs from your firewall, you can get your logs from your proxy server, you can get your logs from Zscaler, you can get your logs into that environment and ensuring that you get the most critical alerts in. You can log from AWS, you can pull in everything across your entire estate into Sentinel. But if you put in too much, you've got to just be cautious that you've got to monitor, you've got to alert that, you've got to try and remediate some of the most critical alerts coming through. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of noise. Again, depending on your size and your maturity as an organization, if you haven't got the maturity, get a third party to come in and have a look at it. These people do it day in, day out, and that's one of the key things, really, is making sure actually you get the knowledge and alerts. So that really covers the defenses we can use within just a Microsoft stack, and I've really only touched a high level piece here, and wanted just to keep it quite light over Christmas. And obviously none of these defenses would have helped Kevin because he would have still been breached, but he had his own mitigations with paint cans and everything. So if you're really stuck and you want to know what a malicious actor looks like, you've got to look out for people like this. So Merry Christmas and have a fantastic New Year, and look forward to catching you all in the new year and potentially at the Scottish Summit as well. So yeah, have a great Christmas all.